Have you found in your research that if I use, say, a 3-year average, that I'm way off?
We have a research paper, and the results is like 30% to 50% difference. Up to.
Wow.
Yeah, it's significant difference. Yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
You're watching Disruptive Investing, and we've got an interview right now with Wenbo Shi. He's the founder of Singularity Energy, and I think you're going to find this pretty interesting. Thank you to Moomoo for sponsoring today's episode.
Right now, the trading platform Moomoo has an exciting holiday magic sweepstakes.
You could win the top prize of $50,000 cash or 10 second-place prizes of $1,000 cash.
In addition to your chance to win big this holiday season, if you open an account and deposit on Moomoo, you also get up to 15 free stocks and $10 cash back.
Moomoo provides almost the lowest margin rate among brokerages. That can really add up.
And Moomoo offers free paper trading.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time. You can use virtual money to simulate trades in the stock market.
It's a great way for beginners to learn about markets, practice trading skills, and build confidence.
Check out Moomoo today and take part in the Holiday Magic Sweepstakes.
Open an account and deposit on Moomoo with our link below to get the big bonus.
All right, well, we're so lucky to have Wenbo Shi with us today. He's the founder of Singularity Energy. This is a startup that started, about 3 years ago?
3 years ago, yes.
Well, thanks for being with us today. So I just read a TechCrunch article about you, and there's a quote here I want to read to you. This is your quote. "The journey was really customer-driven, to be honest. When I started the company 3 years ago, I wasn't thinking of carbon at all. The first idea that I had for Singularity was that we'd do intelligent control for batteries, for EV charging, for those types of things. The objective for battery control is always going to be, how can I save money for the customers?" So you were thinking of doing this business for something completely different. What happened?
So maybe a little bit more context about myself before founding the company. So I was a postdoc researcher at that time at Harvard, working on smart grid related research, mostly focusing on control optimization, right? It's like when to charge, when to discharge, or what is going to be the best optimal strategy for you to manage those new energy resources, right? So I had this idea. I wanted to commercialize that, because that's why we started a commercialization project out of Harvard lab, got some university grant, and then start to do customer discoveries, right? That's always going to be the first step for any commercialization project, right? It's trying to figure out what is a commercial use case of the research, right? What are the market needs? When we started to talk to some of our initial prospects, right, we heard a lot of questions around carbon from them. So I was pitching the idea of better managing your new energy resources for cost savings, for other purposes, but then they started to ask, oh, what about carbon, right? It's like, how can those, EV, people have a general understanding of buying an EV is good for the environment, but people probably don't know how much, right? Like how to quantify that. What is the exact carbon benefits of buying a EV or battery storage, right? And then most importantly, for a lot of the companies, universities, organizations, they have their decarbonization targets, right? They have like carbon neutrality by 2030, 2040, right? Then everything should be measured in carbon, right? Not kilowatt hour anymore. But today, people are doing their management or reporting mostly based on a kilowatt hour metric, right? And then some people start asking that question, oh, how can we do the translation from kilowatt hours to carbon? Because carbon is going to be the end goal, right? It's going to be the metric that we really care about at the end of the day. But that translation is not that easy, right? And that's why, in the initial customer discovery, we heard a lot of, questions about how to do that translation, because there are existing ways to translate kilowatt hours into carbon. I'm not sure if you know anything about that, but most often people are using a static coefficient to do the translation, which is called a emission factor or carbon intensity, right? And that number is like annual average, 2 to 3 years old. Sometimes it's like national average, sometimes it's regional average. And you're using that static number, one number per year, to do the translation. And that is actually no different than using the kilowatt hours. Right? You basically scale the number, right? It's the same thing because it doesn't change, right? It's like, oh, you just have like another way of describing kilowatt hours, right? So that translation, a lot of the folks that we talked to didn't really believe in that number, right? So they asked us questions like, oh, we don't think our current carbon calculation is really accurate or is really reflecting the reality. So they started to ask us questions like, oh, can you help us have a better understanding of our carbon emissions? And then most importantly, how does those decisions like buying renewables, like installing solar panel, right? Buying electric vehicles, electrifying their buildings, right? Electrifying their fleets, how does that impact from a carbon perspective? Once you have that, that first question answered, and then the natural next question is, oh, what about real-time control capabilities, right? Can you actually proactively manage the operations of those new assets? Because most of them are smart, right? Like you have controllability over those new assets. Can you actually proactively manage in a way that not only help you save money, but also helps the grid, right, save carbon, right? So that's really some of the initial very interesting question that I got. As I mentioned, at that time, I was a power system expert, right? But I was no carbon expert. I didn't really know anything about carbon at that time, to be honest. But we heard this question again and again. It was not one single customer. It was like many customers asking similar questions, right? Similar, concerns with the numbers that they're using today for carbon emissions. So that's why, I started to dig deeper into the carbon accounting space, into the carbon management space. And then I realized, wow, this is a big problem, right? There is a big gap between the targets that people are talking about and then the reality that people are using, right? So that's why, I decided to spend more time, digging deeper into the field and then start collecting data and then trying to improve the methodology and then trying to come up with like tools, right? And then the products so that can help people answer that first question. And then to use that first question to inform decisions.
So let's just put this into perspective here. So if I own a house or a business or a university or something like that, and I want to do good, I would say, I know that solar's good. I know that electrifying any sort of fleet of vehicles, whether it's my own daily driver or, campus vehicles or the trucks, delivery trucks. So I know that doing all of that stuff is good. And so I put, solar panels on the roof. Maybe I pay for community solar, and then I dust my hands off and I say, well, I did the thing. Everything should be perfect now. So talk to me about basically going from doing the right thing and saying I'm going to get solar and maybe even batteries, and then I want to know how much carbon impact I'm having. And so you're saying basically the best way I used to be able to do it was to say, well, I live here in Massachusetts and the energy mix is, let me Google that really quickly. It was, it's, this amount of CO2 per kilowatt hour. I'm using this many kilowatt hours. And so times that number, and this is the CO2 that I would have been emitting, and now it's, I think, lower.
I mean, that's kind of like the typical way, right? It's like people, to your point, like people try to get a mix, right? And then to use that annual average or whatever average, you're taking an average, right? But in reality, as you guys may know, the mix actually changes every 5 minutes, right? So it's a dynamic signal. It's not a static thing, right? So if we have a 100% fossil fuel power system, then this problem doesn't exist. Right?
Because we know
exactly.
that it's always carbon intensive.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's always dirty,
Okay.
right? It's always carbon intensive.
But basically, like, there could be a solar farm, 50 miles away from me, and a cloud rolls over it. And so all of a sudden, it's not generating as much. And so then some peaker plant has to kick on somewhere. And then that's going to affect my energy mix. Whereas I'm just saying, well, last year, the energy mix for the entire year, winter, summer, fall, that weird day in March that was freezing cold, that average was X, and I'm going to use that.
But how granular are you getting?
So the granular information coming from the power grid operator or the ISOs, RTOs is every 5 minutes. So like every 5 minutes, you actually know the mix, right? You know exactly how that mix changes. And then what we do is we take those mix and then we translate that mix from megawatt hours into carbon, right? Because today the mix is only about megawatt hours, right? Like you have nuclear, you have solar, you have wind, you have everything, right? And then what we do is like, we take that part, we take that, pie, right? And then we translate that pie into a carbon intensity metric that people can easily apply to their own kilowatt hours, as you mentioned, right? And that number is highly dynamic. So, if you look at our dashboard, we actually have a free dashboard. If you go to, Singularity.energy, you can register a free account, and then you can see the real-time information from all the major markets in the U.S., like PJM, California, right? MISO, northeastern area is ISO New England, right? And then you can see every 5 minutes how that pie chart changes, and then how the carbon intensity changes. And it's very interesting to see sometimes during the day, for example, in California, right? The carbon intensity during this 24 hours, it could be 2x difference. So in some other areas, like, SPP or MISO area, it could be like 40%, 50% because they have a lot of wind, right? So the fluctuation is really about, wind, solar, those renewable sources, which means that, if you don't use a granular or a dynamic signal to do the calculation, you may actually misestimate your emissions by a lot.
That's really powerful. So you're saying our viewers right now could go to singularity.energy and actually sign up for a free account. They could, because a lot of our viewers say this a lot. They're like, well, I live in a state and it's all coal, or I live in a state and it's all hydro. And it's like, I don't think you're right. I think things have changed since the last time you read that. So you're saying this is up to date probably within the last 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So you can see that information. You can see exactly what is supplying the power in your grid, right? And then you can see the percentage of hydro, percentage of coal, percentage of oil. And sometimes you will find very interesting things. Like in northeastern area, like, New England area, I didn't know that we're still burning trash to generate electricity. And it's highly carbon intensive.
Yeah, in fact, you're burning our trash. Some of our trash in our town is that energy you're talking about. So yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah, I didn't know that.
And also, if you compare the two pie charts, in our dashboard, we have two pie charts. One pie chart is the generation measured in megawatt hours. Another pie chart is a carbon pie chart, which is measured in tons of carbon. And then you can see the differences between those two pie charts because different energy sources have very different carbon emission impact, right? So for example, like burning woods, burning trash, it might only consist of like very small percentage from a megawatt hour perspective, maybe 1%, sometimes even less than 1%. But if you look at the carbon pie chart, it could be like 15% or 20%. It's like by comparing those two pie charts side by side, there's a lot of interesting observation that you can make.
That's really powerful because I remember when our town decided to make that contract for burning our trash, and it was only talking about money. No one talked about carbon. I don't think anyone understood anything about it. But knowing that there's another cost involved here might have influenced that decision. So that's really important.
Nice to know. That's great. But how does this help me at all? Okay, so I put solar on my roof, and that means I think that all the electricity that my roof is generating, I'm net zero? Is that basically that's right? Or no?
So you made a very good point, which is like if you have your own rooftop solar, then you're physical zero. If you can really match your consumption with your own generation, then perfect, right? So you're basically having your own microgrid, which is zero, right? So that's the best zero that you can do. But in reality, companies, consumers still depend on the grid.
Well, and also, I might have solar panels on my roof, but then, at night, I'm going to watch Netflix. I'm going to have the air conditioning on. My refrigerator's running. I left that light bulb in the bathroom on. And and the sun isn't shining. So I am using the grid, and the grid is doing something, which is probably not solar, to generate that electricity.
So the grid, to most of the consumers today, is a black box. Like, you don't know what they're doing. You don't know where their power comes from, right? And we're trying to unpack that black box, basically. Right? So we're trying to provide more transparent information, more specifically from a carbon perspective, right? So that when you are actually using the power from a grid, what is the carbon content of it, right? How can you use that information to do your own carbon accounting, for example? Because a lot of companies today, they need to put together their sustainability reports or carbon reports, right? And with the SEC rulemaking, right, people need to report that maybe in the future as part of the requirement, right? So you want to make sure that you can use trustworthy, most accurate information for that. But at the same time, as I said, once you have this information, it can inform a lot of other decision making, right? Like, where do you want to prioritize, right? Where do you want to install your EV charging station that has more cleaner energy in the local grid, not on the regional transmission grid, but in the local grid, right? So there are a lot of other decision-making use cases that can be built on top of this. But the idea is really about trying to take carbon as one of the decision-making criteria or trying to co-optimize, right? We're not only optimizing for carbon, but we want to make sure that we include carbon as one of the metrics.
So, okay. And then there's other things that I can do with this information, right? Like if I have a battery, like we have 4 power walls in our house, and basically we can tell the batteries to charge, and we can tell them to not really discharge. I mean, we can
power the house.
We can go like just power the whole house on this. And we even have a system where National Grid pays us. They paid us yesterday. They drained our battery yesterday to basically help stabilize the grid. But if I wanted to be as green as possible, and I knew that basically, we can generate some amount of solar from our, rooftop panels, but it doesn't quite cover everything because National Grid is a jerk and they didn't let us put as much panels on the roof. We could say, okay, well, it's basically within every 5-minute interval, we could say charge, don't charge, depending on the mix of the grid.
Right.
Is that something that we can do?
That. You can definitely do that. But there are also some nuances around it because today the information that we're providing is not perfect. It's still approximation. It's better than the status quo, right? The status quo is, like I said, annual average, not only last year, but it's like 2 to 3 years old. Like you're using 2020 data to calculate your emissions today, which is obviously going to be wrong, right? So what we do as a first step is, we're using that real-time data coming from the grid operators, but it's still going to be the average over that region, right? It's like New England, like all the New England states are going to be the same, right? And that's kind of like the best information that we can get today. But it's not enough because a lot of things are happening in your distribution grid, for example, right? You have distributed solar, to your point. There are batteries, there are, a lot of things happening, beyond the substation, right? And even on the transmission level, different parts of the transmission system, they may have different mix as well, right? So you can always zoom in, right? From country average, you can zoom in to the regional average. And then from regional average, you can even zoom in to city, average or community average, right? And then the more granular you get, the more accurate that information is going to be, right? So for example, when we talk to some, utilities in Vermont, then they will say, oh, we're actually cleaner than the New England average because they have a lot of hydro, right? Which is true, by the way, right? Because they have a lot of hydro coming from Quebec and they have a lot of hydro generation within the state, right? But today, we don't have that information. It's beyond the public available information. And that's why, we're the only company right now works with both the grid operator as well as utilities, trying to get much better information, beyond the public data so that we can have this granular information, not only on the transmission or system average, but also can provide, potentially in the future, right, a highly local information for your town, for your community, right, for your distribution grid. So it could be similar to weather information today, right? So you have very accurate, very real time, as well as forecasting information about your weather, right? And then you can also have very localized, weather information because that is really going to be the reality or the most accurate information that you can use. Yeah, it's like one step further, but it's not the ideal.
If those utility companies and grids have that information, why isn't it public?
So there are different layers of the issues there, right? So one layer of the issue is if you really want to get that information, then you need to understand the whole system. You need to understand the power topology, the network topology. You need to understand the power flow, basically, right? It's like, what is the power flowing in your system? And that information typically is protected because it's critical infrastructure, right? Like utilities, grid operators don't want to release that information because otherwise there might be some hackers or some other bad people who are trying to leverage that information or to manipulate the markets, for example, right? Because we have electricity markets. So that's why a lot of those proprietary information is not available to the public. But we got some very interesting and initial, I would say, traction with some of the forward-thinking utilities in the space because today utility companies are also facing carbon pressure, right? They have their investor, commitments, right? They also made their own sustainability targets, so they need to understand this themselves, right? So this is the reason why it became very interesting to us because, as I said, 3 years ago when I first founded Singularity, when we had this idea, I actually came to, talk to some of the utilities. They were not interested at that time. They were like, oh, this is super interesting, but we are not going to do it because nobody is asking for this information, right? It's like interesting stuff, but we're not going to do it because there are a lot of risks associated with that. But interestingly, last year, we got some inbounds from some of the utilities. So the reason why they reach out to us is they start to put together their first sustainability reports or carbon accounting results. So they need to better understand the carbon flow, right? It's like, oh, what is a carbon in my system, right? What is a carbon associated with my line losses, right? What is a carbon associated with my delivery of electricity to my customers? Because investors are asking them questions like this, and their leadership, their management is making very bold decarbonization targets, right? And then there are even some competitions, right? Like different utilities will say, oh, we have a more aggressive, goal versus yours, blah, 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 right? But then they need to face the next question is, oh, how are we going to deliver those results, right? How are we really going to change the operations or show to the public or show to the investors that we're making progress? And then the first step is you need to do the measurement, right? You need to better understand the carbon associated with your power system, right? And that's why some of them reach out to us. We started with some pilots, and we're very excited about the potential of rolling out, the most granular information with one of our utility customers now, and we're also in conversation with several other utilities.
Okay, but this sounds so complicated. Every 5 minutes, I got to log onto your website. I got to do some math. It just seems like I'm going to go with the 3-year average, call it a day. You're a business after all, so like, how do you make money doing this?
I mean, that's a great question. So this is the reason why we're trying to simplify this stuff. Right, so we have API product, right? So that people who want to utilize this, they can use our API to easily, get this information, and not only the real-time information, but also the forecasted information, right? And what we realize is, we probably also want to integrate with other, vendors or other companies, right? So that's why, as I said, initially we were talking to the end user directly. But after a few conversations, we started to, talk to the vendors that they use, right? Like the battery storage manufacturers or, the home energy management companies. For example, Sense is our customer, right? Like they're using our API to integrate with their service so that they can provide this information to their customers, right? So we become like a B2B2B or B2B2C type of company.
So for example, like Tesla will often say, we've saved this much carbon this quarter. And if they're just using an average, then their number might be wrong. But if they were working with you, for instance, they might have a very accurate number.
Yes, not only a very accurate number, but also you can zoom in, right? It's also about the granularity or the information that we talked about, like the pie chart, right? Because you want to understand what is driving that number, right? Like what is behind that number, right? Like the transparency or the defensibility of that number. Because if you only give one number to the customer, they might not really know what that number means or to deal with that number. It's very abstract, right? But if you can also show the underlying, like the mix, right? The underlying, what is driving that number, then it becomes much more, it's more informational, but it's also giving people better understanding about how they can really reduce it, right? I mean, because the purpose of this data is always about to inform some decisions or to, let people put more pressure or try to change that. Right? I mean, it's all about, how we can empower, right? What can we empower using this?
Now, from an investment point of view, you guys are a startup. I'm not sure where you're at with seed rounds and stuff, but if I'm watching right now as a viewer and I'm like, hey, this sounds like a pretty good investment. These guys are going to be building this foundational level of data. And it's cool that you're software based, right? So, I mean, it's a nice space to be in, right? Where as you build out your software, it's not that expensive as you add each new customer. So talk to me about crowdfunding rounds or investment rounds. Are you at a place where you're accepting new investors?
So we just closed our seed round a few months ago. That's the TechCrunch article that you saw, right? So we raised a $4.5 million round led by Sparrow Ventures in the Valley as well as Energy Impact Partners. So alongside with some early investors. So we're not really fundraising right now, but we're really looking for, customers, partners who are interested in this type of things, right? And then start exploring. Like I said, there are multiple use cases. We're really, trying to learn more about how customers may use this information, how we can make this simple for other customers to explore. So from a company perspective, we're still pretty early. Like we're still searching, the best use case or the killer app of this, right? And we talk about some of those. So this is the reason why, we're not only building a product, but at the same time, we're also doing some research internally because I have a research background myself. So I'm really trying to solve this issue by providing more fundamental tools or frameworks so that in the future, we can simplify this carbon accounting, world so that people have one number that they can look for, right? And then you can build multiple markets on top of that one number, right? Similar to the electricity market today. But the reality today is this carbon space is very messy. It's like no standards. People may have like different ways of doing carbon accounting or different ways of looking at that number. And there might be some like cherry picking, unfortunately, because there is no, one number that everybody agrees on. So that's why, maybe I want to use 3-year-old annual average.
Well, I want to ask you that. Yeah, I mean, have you found in your research that if I use, say, a 3-year average, that I'm way off?
We have a research paper, and the results is like 30% to 50% difference up to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's significant difference. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah.
I was expecting you to say like 1% to 3% off or something.
Wow.
Okay,
No. It's much more than that. And that comparison, that research was actually using the same year data, not even 3 years old. We're comparing same year using granular versus annual average. And it's actually pretty easy to understand because the carbon emission really depends on your own consumption profile and then the profile of the carbon intensity, right? So if you are not really aligned, for example, if you only use your energy during the daytime and your grid region has a lot of solar, then you have a pretty little carbon footprint, right? Because a lot of the energy resource that you are using comes from solar from the grid, right? But if you are a factory that operates during nighttime, right? It's mostly natural gas or coal, then it's going to be dirty, right? And as I said, as the grid is becoming much more diverse, those fluctuations is going to be very, very significant, even on a daily basis. Not to mention there are seasonalities, right? So like during winter time, it's generally dirtier, right? And then during summertime, it's a little bit cleaner. Even without considering those seasonality, even only looking at like one day, there are significant differences there. So we're targeting the end of August to basically make a public available data sets, which is going to be like hourly compared with annual data that people are using today. And then the unique feature of this hourly grid emission data sets, which we call open grid emissions, is this is a validated data sets. As I said, today in this area, there are so many different data streams, different types of methodologies or models that you can use. And then one of the common questions that we got from some of our users or potential customers is like, why should I trust your data? Right? Why should I trust your data that your data is the most accurate or the most trustworthy one, right? And this data set is trying to answer that question because we're using the EPA, continuous emission monitoring system, which monitors the emissions coming from all the fossil fuel power plants. And then we apply the same methodology coming from the EPA eGrid, which is a 2 to 3 year old annual data set that I was talking about. Like most of the companies are using that information today. And then we did a lot of comprehensive validation, comparison, so that we're using the same consistent methodology, but bring that 2 to 3 year old data to granular hourly data as a first step, right? So that people can start, having confidence in the number. But most importantly, we want to use this hourly benchmark data to validate our real-time estimates.
Now, if we look 5 to 10 years out and you're able to get more and more granular data, to Jesse's point about making decisions as a customer, can you see your product being used by more and more people. Like maybe span, if I have a span electrical panel in my house, and it can be telling me, kind of like you were saying, like, oh, don't turn on your refrigerator now or your washer and dryer now because it's going to be dirty. Can you see that maybe more and more companies would be using your data to talk to customers?
Yes, absolutely. We think this could become like the decarbonization engine that can be embedded into every company's products, basically, right? And then in the future, it's going to be like maybe one signal to the customer, right? Where this is the cheapest time, but this is also the cleanest time, right? Everything can be bundled into one signal, right? And then the grid or the utility is going to send you a signal saying, oh, this is the best time for you to use energy, or this is the best time for you to not use energy, right? And then everything is bundled together because, again, I don't think the consumers or the customers really want to do this manually, right? Because everything should be automated, right? And then there should be some automated decision-making embedded in the grid operators, in the utilities operations, so that everything is optimized for carbon.
Let me go one step further. What if I wanted to give you my data from my house so that I could get back better data? And I know this is in the future, but if I wanted to be able to say like, hey guys at Singularity, take all my data from my batteries, from my solar, so that you can help me make better decisions. Is that something you think could happen down in the future?
Well, yes, I think so, because again, this is kind of like, once you have all the data in one place, right? And then you can start making the optimal decisions, right? So not only the data that from the consumers, but also the data from the power grid, right? That's really why we're working with both sides, right? Like we're kind of like unique in the market right now, because some of the companies who are trying to solve similar problems only work with, the consumers, right? Some other companies, they're only utility focused, right? Because they don't want to touch the end user market. But, our belief is, if you really want to solve the problem, you need information from both sides and you need the collaboration, right? And that's why, as I said, we're trying to become that bridge, or we're trying to become that, decarbonization engine, right? That can really get the system information from the utilities, and then maybe, getting directly the information from the consumers, or working with our customers. Some of the like Sense, some other home energy management companies or the service providers, right? So that we can bring them all together, and we're kind of like the carbon layer of everything.
Yeah, so if our viewers want to go to singularity.energy, check out their dashboard. You can get an account for free. And if you have ideas, if our viewers have ideas for you, maybe they own businesses or maybe they work at a university, how can they reach out to you with their ideas?
So info@singularity.energy. So feel free to send us emails. Like I said, we have a free dashboard. We have like a free tier for the API, so people can start exploring our data. And we're really, like I said, we're really open to new ideas, like, new use cases, and always happy to discuss with people who share the same vision, who really want to understand deeper about the problem that we're trying to solve.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today, Wenbo. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I got to be honest, Jesse. We went into this interview and I checked out the company, but I was like...
Didn't fully understand it.
No, I knew there's a dashboard and all that, but I'm like, dashboard for what? I thought
does this solve anything?
Right.
Because I was under the impression that you'd simply take some amount of grams per CO2.
Right. I'm in Massachusetts. Yep. I do this thing. I multiply it and I get my carbon. This is really exciting to me because I can picture 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where he does have my data. Like I do share my house's solar panels and my power walls. And maybe they're able to give back to me way more information, maybe in my Tesla app. Maybe they share it with Tesla, where it says, hey, Zach, now's a great time to store energy, like you said, that's really clean.
Well, and this is where the market forces can simply do what they're going to do. Right. If everyone decides, like we all decide about many different things, oh, I want to eat healthy food, so you buy healthy food. Well, guess what that means? That means that the unhealthy food brands... change their tune. They say, oh, now we have more healthy options.
Well, I want to go one step further. What if the government, now that we have this information, says, hey, Jesse, if you use clean energy, you will get a tax break.
Who even needs the government? I'm a libertarian. No, the government. If I say, and if most people say I want greener energy and all I have to do is hit a button that says green, and I am going to be buying energy when it's the greenest and being able to store it or use it in my house to turn on heat or something, then all of a sudden...
I agree, and you would hope that would work, that the open market would work. But I'm just saying, we do this already. people watching, the government incentivizes home ownership.
Sure.
It incentivizes solar on your roof. I mean, so there's plenty of things the government does.
But all we need is the information, and it turns on both of those
Exactly,
things.
exactly.
It allows the market to basically, we would be able to increase the price of clean energy, retail, because people would want it more, which means that solar and wind companies would be making more money per unit of energy than dirty
And
sources.
right now, without this service, you can't, because you can't definitively say that the energy you're buying at this moment is any cleaner or dirtier.
And it would also allow people who really care to change the way that they live their lives and be able to probably integrate to say like, okay, I'm going to have, a washer dryer, because they have, I know that nobody likes them, but let's say that they come up with some great washer dryer. I'm going to put my dirty clothes in before I leave for work. And then noon, when the sun is the highest and the energy is the cleanest, that's when it's going to kick on automatically. It's going to wash and dry it. And I mean, there's so many different little solutions like this that no one's thinking about right now because we don't have the information.
And to your point, go to singularity.energy, check out the free dashboard, and just play around with it for a little bit and see how you like it. Put comments down below about what you learned about your energy that you didn't know before. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. If you liked what you saw here today, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification button so you'll be notified each time we have a new episode out. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll see you next time.